Hey everyone, Rod here. And I gotta be honest, this isn't my usual video about, exploring hidden cafes in Prague or hiking the Inca Trail. This is something different, something that's been weighing on my mind, and I bet on yours too. We're going to dive into a hypothetical scenario, a what if that's terrifying and unfortunately feels all too real in our current world. What if World War III breaks out? This video is part of a trial series where I'm exploring new horizons, and trust me, we'll be back to our regularly scheduled travel programming soon. But for now, let's grapple with this heavy question together. We're going to break down the potential global consequences, from political alliances to economic impacts, humanitarian crises, environmental devastation, and the terrifying future of warfare. So, buckle up, because things are about to get real. Let's dive in. So, who's on first, right? When it comes to global conflicts, the question of alliances and enemies is far from straightforward. In a global conflict, it's not as simple as picking teams like a game of pickup basketball. The stakes are much higher, and the rules are far more complex. We're talking about a complex web of alliances, treaties, and historical grudges. These relationships have been built and broken over decades, sometimes even centuries. NATO, for example, could be obligated to defend any member nation that's attacked. This means that an attack on one member could potentially draw in multiple countries into the conflict. Russia, on the other hand, might have alliances with countries like China or Iran. These alliances can shift the balance of power and complicate the global landscape even further. And then there are the wild cards. Countries that might not have clear alliances but could play pivotal roles depending on how the situation unfolds. Countries that might try to stay neutral or could be swayed to join one side or the other. Their decisions could tip the scales in unexpected ways. It's a geopolitical chess match with incredibly high stakes. Every move is calculated, and the consequences of each decision can be far-reaching. Imagine the pressure on leaders, the frantic diplomacy, the backroom deals, and the agonizing decisions with potentially millions of lives hanging in the balance. The weight of these choices is almost unimaginable. And it wouldn't just be governments involved. Civilian populations would be deeply affected, with protests, volunteer efforts, and humanitarian crises becoming part of the landscape. Think about the role of international organizations like the United Nations. They would be tasked with trying to mediate and manage the conflict, a role that is both crucial and incredibly challenging. Would they be able to broker peace, or would they be powerless to stop the conflict? The effectiveness of these organizations can vary greatly depending on the situation. It's a terrifying thought, but one that forces us to confront the fragility of peace in our world. The delicate balance that keeps global peace intact can be disrupted in an instant, reminding us of the importance of diplomacy and international cooperation. Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the economic fallout. A global war wouldn't just be about bombs and bullets. It would be about supply chains collapsing, trade routes severed, and global markets in free fall. Imagine a world where oil prices skyrocket, food becomes scarce, and entire industries grind to a halt. Remember the 2008 financial crisis? Now multiply that by like 1,000. We're talking about hyperinflation, mass unemployment, and economic depression on a scale never seen before. And it wouldn't just be the countries directly involved in the fighting that would suffer. The globalized nature of our world means that the economic shockwaves would be felt everywhere. Suddenly that cup of coffee you love, that phone in your pocket, that vacation you were planning, all of it becomes a luxury few can afford. It's a sobering reminder of how interconnected our world really is, and how quickly things can fall apart. Chapter 3. A Sea of Suffering. The Humanitarian Crisis. War, at its core, is about human suffering. It tears apart the very fabric of society, leaving behind a trail of devastation and despair. And in a global conflict, the scale of that suffering would be almost unimaginable. Entire communities uprooted, cities reduced to rubble, and lives shattered beyond repair. We're talking about millions, potentially billions of people displaced from their homes, fleeing war-torn countries, seeking refuge wherever they can find it, searching for safety and security. Imagine the refugee camps, the overcrowded hospitals, the makeshift shelters that become temporary homes for countless families, the desperate pleas for food, water, and medical supplies. Basic necessities that we often take for granted become scarce and precious commodities in these dire situations. And then there's the invisible wounds of war, the psychological trauma, the families torn apart, the children who have lost their innocence too soon, the lasting scars on the human psyche. It's a bleak picture, one that paints a harrowing reality of the human condition in times of conflict, but one we can't afford to ignore. The faces of those affected by war are a stark reminder of our shared humanity. Because in the face of such immense suffering, we have a moral obligation to act, to extend a helping hand to those who have lost everything. We have a moral obligation to act, to provide aid and support, to offer a glimmer of hope in the darkest of times, to help those in need, to ensure that no one is left behind. Every act of kindness, every gesture of support can make a world of difference. To offer refuge and support. It's about coming together as a global community, united in our efforts to alleviate suffering and restore dignity. It's a reminder that beyond the geopolitical maneuvering and the economic consequences, there are real people whose lives would be irrevocably changed. People who need our compassion and our action. There are real people whose lives would be irrevocably changed. And it's our duty as citizens of the world to stand in solidarity with them. And it's our duty as citizens of the world to do everything in our power to alleviate their suffering, to advocate for peace, to support humanitarian efforts, and to never turn a blind eye to the plight of those in need, to do everything in our power to alleviate their suffering, because in the end, our humanity is measured by how we treat the most vulnerable among us. Chapter 4. Our planet, scarred and burning. As if the human cost wasn't enough, we also have to consider the environmental consequences of a global war. Imagine the nuclear fallout, the toxic chemicals released into the atmosphere, the long-term damage to our planet's delicate ecosystems. We're talking about poisoned water supplies, contaminated soil, and a dramatic increase in cancer rates and other diseases. And then there are the long-term effects of climate change, already a pressing issue, which would be exacerbated by the massive release of greenhouse gases from military operations and industrial collapse. It's a terrifying thought that our actions today could have such devastating consequences for generations to come. But it's also a call to action. A reminder that we need to find peaceful solutions to our problems, to invest in diplomacy and international cooperation, and to protect the planet we all share. Because in the end, there is no planet B. Chapter 5. The terrifying future of warfare. Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Or maybe it's more like a robot holding a laser gun in the room. Because in a future world war, we're not just talking about traditional warfare. We're talking about drone strikes, cyber attacks, artificial intelligence, and autonomous weapons systems. Imagine a world where wars are fought not on battlefields but in cyberspace, where critical infrastructure is crippled with the push of a button, where algorithms decide who lives and who dies. It's a terrifying thought, and one that raises serious ethical questions about the future of warfare. What happens when machines become the primary actors in conflict? What role do humans play in a world where war is fought at the speed of light? These are questions we need to be asking ourselves now before it's too late, because the future of warfare is uncertain, but one thing is clear: the stakes have never been higher. Outro: a call to action, choosing our future. So, there you have it. We've taken a brief look at some of the most pressing issues that could shape our future in ways we might not want to imagine. A glimpse into a potential future that none of us want to see. The devastation of war, the loss of lives, and the destruction of communities are stark reminders of what could happen if we don't act. It's a sobering thought, but one that I believe is important to confront. We can't afford to ignore these possibilities, no matter how uncomfortable they may be. Because by understanding the potential consequences of our actions, we can work to prevent them from ever becoming a reality. It's about taking responsibility and making informed decisions. This video is just the beginning of a conversation, a starting point for us to explore the big questions facing our world. It's an invitation to think critically and engage with these issues. A starting point for us to explore the big questions facing our world. What kind of future do we want to create? How can we work together to ensure a better tomorrow? In the coming weeks, we'll be diving into other global scenarios, from climate change to pandemics. These are not just abstract concepts, they are real challenges that require our attention and action. To the rise of artificial intelligence. How will AI shape our societies? What ethical considerations do we need to keep in mind as we develop these technologies? So if you're as fascinated by these topics as I am, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Stay informed and be part of the conversation. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps us bring more content that matters. and hit that notification bell so you don't miss an episode. We have a lot of exciting and important content coming up. For now, let's keep the conversation going in the comments below. Your thoughts and opinions are valuable, and we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the possibility of World War III? Do you think it's a realistic threat or something we can avoid with the right actions? What other global scenarios should we explore? Let me know. Your suggestions will help shape the direction of our future videos. And as always, thanks for watching. Your support means the world to us, and together, we can make a difference.